During Ramadan, I stood in front of a church door with my arms out and refused to let a single Christian walk past me. What the pastor did next is something I will never be able to explain without talking about God. My name is Idris, and I am 27 years old. From Columbus, Ohio, I grew up in a Moroccan household where Ramadan was the holiest month of the year, and where the idea of a Muslim blocking a church door would have seemed not just acceptable, but righteous and necessary and long overdue. I did not grow up hating Christians. I grew up certain about Islam the way you are certain about gravity. You do not test it. You do not argue with it. You simply build your whole life on top of it and trust that it will hold. I built everything on it. Right up until the evening, a pastor in a blue jacket walked toward me with his hands open and said something that cracked the ground beneath my feet. My father, Hamid, came to Columbus from Casablanca when I was 3 years old. He had an engineering degree and a brother already in Ohio, who helped him find work at a manufacturing company near the airport. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Hilltop neighborhood for the first 6 years. My mother cooked harira on Sunday afternoons, and the whole building smelled like tomatoes and cumin and warm bread. My father prayed 5 times a day on a small mat he kept folded in the bedroom closet. When he unrolled it, I knew to be quiet. The mosque was 40 minutes from our apartment by bus. My father took me every Friday from the time I was 6 years old. I wore a white kufi that my mother pressed flat with her palm before we left. I sat beside my father in the rows of men and listened to the khutbah even when I could not follow all the Arabic. The important thing was to be there. The important thing was to be seen being there. By the time I was 10, we had moved to a better apartment closer to the mosque. By 12, I was memorizing Quran on my own before my father asked me to. I wanted to. I wanted to be the kind of son he described to his friends with that low, proud voice he used when he did not know I was listening. In high school, I was a serious student and a serious Muslim both. I did not go to parties. I did not date. I fasted Ramadan without complaint every year from the age of 12. My non-Muslim classmates found this interesting in the way Americans find discipline interesting, half from a distance, with respect and mild confusion. I did not mind. I was not trying to be like them. I was trying to be something more specific. At Ohio State, I studied communications. I joined the Muslim Students Association in my first week and was leading it by my junior year. I had a gift for speaking in front of people. I knew how to take a complex idea and make it feel urgent and personal. My professor said so. The MSA member said so. The Imam at our mosque said so the first time he heard me give a Friday message when I was 22 and he was out of town. He said, "Idris, you have a voice that moves people. Use it for Allah." I took that seriously. I used it. After graduation, I did not go into the media career my degree was supposed to prepare me for. I started a non-profit called Clear Path, focused on what I described as protecting Muslim identity in American public life. We ran social media accounts, produced short documentary videos, hosted community events, and organized rapid responses when we felt the Muslim community was being targeted or misrepresented. ClearPath grew faster than I expected. Within 2 years, we had over 80,000 followers across platforms. I was invited to speak at mosques across Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. I appeared on a local Columbus news segment twice. Islamic organizations in Chicago and Detroit were sharing our content regularly. I was 25 and I felt like I was doing exactly what I was built to do. The thing that sharpened my focus most sharply was what I call predatory outreach. Christian churches running programs in Muslim-majority neighborhoods, using free services as the entry point and conversion as the hidden goal. I had documented cases from Columbus, from Cincinnati, from Detroit. Churches that offered free ESL classes, free childcare, free legal help for immigrants, all of it wrapped in a package that ended with Bible study and medicine invitations to Sunday service. I was not against charity. I was against a charity that came with a hook in it. Abundant Life Church sat on the edge of the Morse Road corridor in Columbus, a neighborhood that had shifted significantly over the previous 15 years towards Somali and Arab and Bosnian Muslim families. The church had been there before that shift and had adapted its ministry specifically toward the new community around it. They had Arabic-speaking volunteers. They had Somali translators. Their community services program was called Open Arms, and it ran 6 days a week out of their fellowship hall. I had been watching Abundant Life for 8 months before Ramadan. Their Open Arms numbers had grown. I had seen the social media posts. Families from our community going in, coming back with shopping bags of food, coming back a second time, a third time. One woman from our mosque told me quietly that she had started attending a Bible study there because the volunteers were kind to her children. She said she was not going to convert. She said she just liked the kindness. That conversation kept me up for 2 nights. During those 2 nights, I made a decision. The most visible, most confrontational thing I had ever done. I decided that during Ramadan, the holiest month of the Islamic year, I would lead a sustained public demonstration at Abundant Life Church that would make it impossible for them to continue their outreach without the entire community knowing exactly what was happening inside those walls. I started organizing in the second week of Ramadan. I called community leaders from 4 mosques. I built a schedule so we could maintain a presence at the church entrance during their open arms hours 6 days a week for the final 2 weeks of Ramadan. I printed materials in English, Arabic, and Somali explaining our position. I made a video announcing the action that got 14,000 views in 48 hours. I was focused and energized in the specific way that fasting during Ramadan can make you feel. Light and sharp and very sure of what you believe. On the first morning of the demonstration, I arrived at Abundant Life at 8:45 a.m. with 23 people. We stood at the entrance to the parking lot. We held the signs. We handed materials to anyone who drove in. Some people turned around. Most parked and walked past us without making eye contact. By the 4th day, we had 40 people and a system that worked. By the 8th day, something happened that I had not planned for. I decided to stand directly in the doorway. No blocking it with a chain or a lock. Just standing in it. Arms at my sides, body filling the frame. Making anyone who wanted to enter have to ask me to move or push past me, making the decision visible, making the choice real. I stood in that doorway for 40 minutes on the 8th day of our demonstration. It was the 3rd week of Ramadan. I had been fasting since before sunrise. The afternoon sun was on my back and the inside of the church was cool. And I could smell something being cooked in the fellowship hall, something savory and warm. And I stood in that doorway like a wall and I felt completely righteous. Then the pastor came. His name was Pastor James Ooze. He was Ghanaian American, tall, with close-cut hair going gray at the sides and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the way people wear them when they forget they are there. He walked out of a side hallway and saw me standing in the doorway and did not stop walking toward me. He did not speed up either. He just kept the same steady pace, like a man who had somewhere to be and was not in a hurry to get there. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. I was a head shorter than him. He did not use that. He did not lean forward or draw himself up. He just stood at his full height and looked at me with an expression that I spent the next several weeks trying to accurately name. It was not anger. It was not the careful politeness of someone managing a difficult situation. It was something more direct than both, like he was actually seeing me. Not the demonstration, not the sign in my hand, me. He said, "I know who you are. You are Idris from Clear Path. I have watched your videos." I did not say anything. He said, "I have been wanting to meet you. I think you care about this community as much as we do, and I think we should talk." I said, "I am not interested in talking. I am interested in you stopping what you are doing to Muslim families." He nodded slowly. He said, "I hear that. Can I ask you one thing before you decide that for certain?" Darwa, I said nothing, which he took as permission. He said, "Have you ever been inside this building?" I said no. He said, then everything you believe about what happens here is based on what other people told you. He said that calmly, not as an accusation, as a simple observation. He said, I am inviting you to come in and see for yourself. Today, right now, walk through the whole building. Look at every room. Talk to any volunteer you choose. Ask any question you want. If you find what you think you are going to find, you will have better ammunition than a sign. And if you do not find it, at least you will know the truth. His offer surprised me. People who are hiding something do not typically invite you to look at everything. Behind me, I heard some of our group telling me not to go. I heard Ramadan cited. I heard warnings about being manipulated. Nadia, one of our lead organizers, grabbed my elbow and said quietly that this was exactly how they worked and that I needed to hold the line. I stood there for a moment. Then I said to Pastor James, I will come in, but I am bringing 3 people with me. He said, bring as many as you want. I brought Nadia and 2 others. We walked inside. The fellowship hall was large and plain. Folding tables were set up in rows. On them were boxes of canned goods, fresh vegetables, bread, hygiene products. Volunteers were sorting and packing bags. About half the volunteers appeared to be from the congregation. The other half I recognized from the neighborhood. A Somali woman named Hodan, who I knew from community meetings, was standing at a table sorting children's clothing. She nodded at me without surprise, like she had been expecting me to show up eventually. I walked to her immediately. I asked her what she was doing here. She said she was helping pack food bags because families in the neighborhood needed food, and this was where the food was. She said no one had ever pushed a Bible at her. She said no one had ever made her feel unwelcome when she said she was Muslim. She said the children's English class her kids attended here was the best thing that had happened to her family since arriving in Columbus 2 years ago. I asked her directly, did anyone here try to convert you? She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, a volunteer once told me she was praying for my family. I told her we were Muslim. She said she prayed for Muslim families too. That was it. I walked through the rest of the building with Pastor James. He showed me the classrooms, the curriculum for the ESL courses, the job training materials, a small room with donated clothing sorted by size and labeled clearly, a corner with Bibles on a shelf and a small sign that said free to take. Nothing hidden, nothing requiring attendance at services, nothing conditional. In the kitchen, 3 women were cooking. The smell I had noticed from the doorway was chicken and rice, and something spiced with cumin that reminded me of my mother's kitchen. They were cooking for the families who would come in the afternoon. Pastor James told me they did this 3 days a week. No charge, no requirement, just food for people who needed it. I stood in that kitchen for longer than I meant to. When we came back out to the main hall, Pastor James asked me if I found what I expected to find. I said I needed to think. He said, fair enough. He said the door was open whenever I wanted to come back. We left and rejoined the demonstration outside. Nadia asked immediately what I had seen. I gave a vague answer. I said the tour was informative and we needed to assess what we learned. She pushed for specifics. I said I needed more time. That was true. I needed more time. That evening, I broke my fast alone. I sat at my kitchen table with a bowl of soup and the memory of Hodan's voice, saying no one ever pushed a Bible at her, and the smell of chicken and cumin from that kitchen. And I could not make the image of abundant life fit the picture I had been carrying for 8 months. I had organized 40 people to stand outside a building I had never been inside. I had made videos with specific claims about specific practices. I had told audiences in Columbus and Detroit and Indianapolis that churches like Abundant Life were wolves in sheep's clothing. I had not verified a single thing I said. That thought sat in my chest like something cold. I did not tell anyone on the team what I was feeling. I showed up the next morning and stood with the demonstration and held my position. But something had shifted in the air between me and what I was doing. The certainty had a hairline crack in it. Small, but there. On the 11th day of Ramadan, I did something I had not told anyone I was going to do. I went back to Abundant Life alone in the middle of the day. and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I went inside. Pastor James was in his office. His door was open. He looked up and seemed genuinely glad to see me. He waved me in and pointed at the chair across from his desk. He did not ask why I came back. He just said, "What is on your mind?" And something about the simplicity of that question broke something open in me that I had not expected to break. I told him I had questions I could not ask in front of my team. I told him the tour had not given me what I expected. I told him Hodan's answer to my question about conversion pressure had not matched what I told people about places like his church. He listened. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do with that?" I said I did not know. He said, "That is an honest answer." He said most people in your position would have ignored what they saw and kept the demonstration going because the cost of admitting uncertainty was too high. He said the fact that I came back was worth something. I asked him directly what he believed about Muslims, not about Islam as a religion, about the actual people who followed it. He said, "I believe Muslims love God. I believe that love is real. I believe God sees it. I do not believe the name we give to our love for God is more important to him than the love itself." He paused. He said, "But I also believe that Jesus is not just one path among many. I believe he is the truth about who God actually is. And I cannot pretend otherwise to be polite." His honesty surprised me. He did not soften it. He did not apologize for it. He said it the way you say something true, plainly and without decoration. I said, "That is what I find offensive. The idea that my faith is insufficient." He said, "I understand that completely." He said he was not telling me my love for God was wrong. But he was telling me that Jesus was offering something my love for God could not reach on its own. He said there was a difference between those two things. I left without resolving anything, but I took something with me that I could not put back. That night I did something I had been resisting for weeks. I opened a Bible on my phone, the same app my younger sister had shown me 2 years ago when she was in a comparative religion class at Ohio State. I had downloaded it then and never opened it. I went to the Gospel of John because it was the one I heard quoted most often in debates. I read until 1 a.m. The Jesus in John was not the Jesus I had been trained to argue against. I had been trained against a Jesus who was invented by Paul and made divine at Nicaea, and whose original message was a simple ethical call to worship the one God. That was the version I knew. That was the version I had quoted in videos. But the Jesus in John said things no one who believed himself to be a mere prophet had ever said. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." He said, "Before Abraham was, I am." He said to one of his followers, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." He said, "I and the Father are one." These were not the words of a prophet passing along a message. These were the words of someone claiming to be the message. Someone claiming to be God himself standing inside human skin. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling. I had told audiences for 4 years that this claim was an invention of later theology, that the historical Jesus never said anything like this. I had cited scholars. I had made charts. I had built a whole framework around the idea that the divine Jesus was a construction layered over the real human prophet underneath. I went looking for the academic sources I had cited. I found them again. I read them more carefully this time, more slowly, looking for what they actually said rather than what I had remembered them saying. What I found was that even the scholars most skeptical of Christian claims acknowledged the core material in John was early. Too early to be a late theological invention. The Gospel of John was not a 4th century document. Manuscript evidence placed it in the late 1st century, written within living memory of the events it described. I spent 3 nights doing this, going back to the sources, reading what they actually said, checking what I had claimed against what the evidence actually showed. What I found was a gap. A significant gap between what I had been teaching and what the evidence supported. I had done to my audiences exactly what I accused the churches of doing. I had given them a shaped version of reality designed to produce a predetermined conclusion. I had called it research. It was advocacy. The guilt of that sat in me like a physical weight. I stopped sleeping well. I stopped being able to focus on clear path work with the same drive. Our team had 3 projects in development, and I was ghosting meetings. Nadia called me twice asking if I was okay. I said yes, I was not okay. On the last day of Ramadan, I drove to Abundant Life at 6 in the evening. The Open Arms program was still running. Our demonstration had thinned to about 12 people by then. I drove past them and parked in the lot and walked in through the same front door I had stood blocking 12 days earlier. Pastor James was still in his office at 6 in the evening. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. He said, "I had a feeling you would come back today." I said, "I have been reading the Gospel of John." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What did you find?" I said, "Someone I was not prepared for." He nodded slowly. He said, "Tell me more." I sat in that chair across from his desk and I talked it for almost 2 hours. Everything that had cracked over the previous 12 days. The gap between what I had claimed and what the evidence showed. The Jesus in John who refused to fit the category I had built for him. The weight in my chest that had been there since I stood in his kitchen and smelled the food being made for people who needed it. He listened to everything. He asked good questions. He did not rush me toward any conclusion. Near the end, he said, "Idris, you are describing a man who is genuinely seeking truth, even when finding it will cost him something significant. That is a rare thing." He said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Have you ever asked Jesus directly to show you who he is? Not as a theological exercise, not as research, just spoken to him like he might actually be present and asked him to make himself real to you?" I said that felt like betrayal. He said, "What if it was the most honest thing you ever did?" I drove home that night and sat in my car in the dark for a long time. Ramadan was ending at sunset. I had spent the holiest month of the Islamic year standing outside a church, and the thing I had found inside was not what I went looking for. I sat in the dark and I spoke out loud. I said it simply. I said, "I do not know who you are. I was taught one thing. I am finding something different. If you are real, the way Pastor James says you are real, I need you to show me. Not in a way I can explain away. In a way I cannot. I have built my whole life on certainty. I am not certain anymore. If you are the truth, I want to know the truth. Please." I sat in my car in the Abundant Life parking lot at the end of Ramadan, and the last light was going out of the sky and it was quiet, the way things are quiet right before something happens. Then it happened. Not a vision, not a voice out loud, but the silence in that car changed. It became full instead of empty, in the way that only happens when someone enters a space. And inside that fullness was a warmth that moved through me from my chest outward. And it was not my body heat, and it was not the car heater because the car was off. It was something coming from outside me and landing inside me and staying. I sat with it for a long time. When I finally drove home, my face was wet, and I had been crying without knowing when it started. I did not sleep that night, but it was not the anxious sleeplessness of the previous 2 weeks. It was the sleeplessness of someone sitting with something too large to close their eyes on. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and felt the warmth still in my chest and thought about my father on his prayer mat and my mother's harira on Sunday afternoons, and the kufi pressed flat by her palm and everything I was built out of, and I felt grief for none of it. I felt like all of that love for God had been heading somewhere that I had only now arrived at. I called Pastor James in the morning. I said something happened last night. He said he knew. He said he could hear it in my voice. He said, "Come in." I went in that afternoon. We sat in his office for 2 hours. I told him everything that happened in the car. He listened with the same steady attention he always gave. Like what I was saying mattered, and he was not going anywhere. At the end, he asked me where I was. I said, "I believe Jesus is who he said he was." I said it out loud for the first time, and it landed in the room with a weight that surprised me. I believe he is God. I believe what he said about himself is true. I do not have all the answers, but I believe him. Pastor James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Welcome to the family." Those 4 words hit me harder than anything I expected. Not because they were dramatic, because they were simple and immediate and real. No conditions, no waiting period. Just, you are here. You belong here. Welcome. I told Nadia the following week. She was the person I trusted most on the team, and she deserved to hear it from me directly before she heard it any other way. We sat at a coffee shop and I told her the whole story from the tour on the 8th day of the demonstration forward. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment. Then she said she felt like she had lost someone she knew. She said she was not angry. She said she was sad. That conversation was one of the hardest of my life. Nadia was not cruel. She did not threaten. She just looked at me with grief, and I had to sit inside that grief and know I caused it in someone who had worked beside me and trusted me. I shut down ClearPath over the following month. I posted a video explaining what happened. I said I had become a Christian. I said I was sorry to the people who followed our work and trusted what I taught. I said I could not stand behind the content anymore because I had found that some of it was not built on honest research. I said I still believed they loved God and that their love was real. I said Jesus was the one who showed me that. But the response was enormous. Most of it was angry. Some of it was threatening. A smaller number of messages came from people who said they had their own questions they had been afraid to ask and that my video made them feel less alone. I read every single one. My father did not speak to me for 2 months. My mother called every 3 days, but we talked around the subject like it was a piece of furniture in the middle of the room that neither of us was ready to name. When she finally asked me directly what I believed, I told her. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said she did not understand it, but she still loved me. That sentence was the most important thing anyone said to me that year. I was baptized at Abundant Life on a Sunday in December. Pastor James stood with me. The congregation was full. When I came up out of the water, the room was warm and loud, and I stood there dripping and breathing and feeling the specific peace of someone who has stopped running and arrived somewhere real. I work now as a volunteer coordinator at Abundant Life's Open Arms program. I help design outreach that serves the Muslim community in our neighborhood with the same transparency and genuine care I witnessed when I walked through that building the first time. I do not pressure anyone. I do not use charity as a hook. I just serve because I watched it being done honestly, and I know now that Jesus is the reason it looks the way it does. Several months ago, I was outside Abundant Life on a Tuesday morning, and a young man was standing across the street watching the building with an expression I recognized immediately. Tight jaw, arms crossed. The specific body language of someone who is angry and certain and already building the argument. I walked across the street and introduced myself. I said, I used to stand exactly where you are standing. I said I used to feel exactly what I think you might be feeling right now. I told him my name and he recognized it from ClearPath. His expression changed from hard to confused. I said, I am not going to tell you what to believe, but I will tell you what I found when I stopped standing outside and went inside. And if you ever want to hear it, I am here. He did not say anything. He walked away. But the following Tuesday, he was back. Not across the street this time. He was standing near the entrance. He looked at me when I came out, and he said, okay, tell me what you found. I took him inside. I showed him the same things Pastor James showed me. I answered his questions the way mine were answered, honestly and without pressure. I told him about the car in the parking lot at the end of Ramadan, and the warmth that was not the heater and the face that was wet without my knowing when it started. He listened to everything without speaking. Then he said, what am I supposed to do with that? I said, ask Jesus directly. Tell him the truth about where you are. See what he does with it. He has been coming back every Tuesday for 6 weeks. Something is happening in him that I recognize because I watched it happen in me. A question that started and will not stop. A crack in the certainty where light is coming through. I pray for him every morning. I pray for Nadia. I pray for my father. I pray for every person who stood with me outside that church during Ramadan, holding a sign made from incomplete information and genuine love for God. That love was real. I know it was real because I felt it. Jesus did not ask me to stop loving God to follow him. He showed me that following him was the truest direction that love could go. The door to abundant life is still open. The banner above it says, "Open Arms." I used to stand outside it, blocking the way in. Now I hold it open for everyone who comes.